Okay, all right. My name is Conrad Smith-Benz. I work at Bread for the World. I'm a program officer for the Development Education Program and the Economic Emergency Fund. I will say a couple of words on that later. I feel very honored, and thank you very much for inviting me, for having me here. I'm looking forward to a very interesting exchange and discussion. I want to say a couple of words on this kind of big headline, transforming our world through educational cooperation. Because I wasn't exactly sure what audience to expect. The transforming our world, I just give a brief introduction to what these words, what I mean by these words. Transforming our world is part of the title of the Agenda 2030 adopted by the United Nations in 2015, where they adopted 17 sustainable development goals that apply to all countries of the world, that apply globally. On poverty, on hunger, on health, on education, on gender, on water, on energy, on economic growth, and other areas of societal interest and world society. Now, the fourth goal is on education. To be precise, it is calling upon all societies and governments, but also private and civil society actors to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. So what I think is important are these four keywords: inclusive, equitable, quality, and lifelong learning, which is a very ambitious goal to have that ensured by 2030 in all countries of the world. Just like the other sustainable development goals are also very ambitious goals. This goal, with a couple of other goals, is one that, however, is closely intertwined with reaching those other 16 sustainable development goals. Because I personally believe, and that is also the spirit of this declaration, is that, of course, quality education that is accessible for everybody is needed to achieve those other goals. So now, what do I mean by educational cooperation? Cooperation can take place on a number of levels. I just wanted to make that clear so we can keep that in mind for the discussion later on. That, of course, first we think of educational institutions like schools and universities. There, of course, you have different levels where cooperation can take place, and between the different levels, cooperation can take place. On a student level, on a teacher's level, on a researcher's level. You have something I call professional actors, so non-educational institutions, which are public organizations, but also very much businesses, and also the civil society, where also a lot of educational cooperation takes place. We'll say a couple of words on that later. And you have, I call them now private actors, not in terms of private business, but in terms of your private life. Your family, your friends, your social networks, all of that are levels where you cooperate with each other and also educate each other. So that's also important to keep that in mind when we talk, especially when we talk about the intertwinement of economics, culture, and education. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, but I just listed a couple of, or most things I came up with, what different types of educational cooperation there are. And of course, you have financial cooperation, so you for educational projects. So this is something that Bread for the World is. Financial cooperation is one of the key aspects of Bread for the World. It's an NGO, but it's a donor NGO. So Bread for the World is funding project partners in a cooperative dialogue to implement projects all over the world, also educational projects. You have exchange programs, so for example, volunteer programs where young people, after they finished high school or after they finished university, go to another country to engage in voluntary work and contribute to cultural diplomacy, well, actually. You have scholarship programs, funding students, researchers to afford a particular type of education. We also have virtual classrooms and e-learning formats, so people coming together online to educate each other, to share a lecture, to have a discussion, also at the level of school children. You have, of course, cooperation in research and development. For example, Bread for the World, there is a so-called a global reference group. That means a collection of representatives of different partner organizations from all over the world come together twice a year to discuss the policies and the strategies of Bread for the World. And that, of course, is also an educational cooperation. You have that in the private sector, which I'm not too familiar, like in the business sector, which I'm not too familiar with, but of course that's very key, I think a key level of cooperation. We even have schools, universities, programs that are multilateral. So different countries coming together, different universities from different countries coming together and developing one shared program, or even setting up one like a multilateral university. There is not many projects like that, but I expect this to increase. Of course, you have some like a cooperative management of learning and education, of innovation processes, and you have something which I would like to point out, which is more like on the non-formal aspect. You have education and migration. So people coming to another country, going to another country to seek a particular type of education. Sometimes going back to their country or going to yet another country. That is education and migration. And that also contributes to educational cooperation. And of course you have friends networks, peer-to-peer learning networks. Maybe you have a particular interest that where you're active in a Facebook group and exchange ideas with people all over the world. That also contributes to educational cooperation. Just to name a couple of types, which might inform also the discussion later on. Now, Bread for the World, as already mentioned a little bit, is engaged with, I would say, 5 of these different types of educational cooperation. So I mentioned already financial cooperation and exchange programs. There is Bread for the World is sending volunteers to countries of the Global South, also African countries, but it's also receiving volunteers and trying to find places for them in German society from the Global South, very much including African countries. On the scholarship program, I will get into a bit more detail in a bit. I mentioned already the coming together of different strategy groups to find solutions to certain issues, to certain problems of development. And we have education and migration, which is kind of my area of expertise, actually, that I will also say now a couple of more words on. So scholarships of Bread for the World, they're always based on a partnership. So the aspect, the principle of cooperation is very central to the scholarship programs. That means you cannot apply for a scholarship as an individual to Bread for the World, but it is based on a cooperation with a partnership, with a partner organization that says, okay, we are in need of this and this type of expertise. We have this person that we believe can acquire this expertise, but we need like a scholarship program in order to help that person acquire that expertise and apply it in our organization. And so this is always a triangular relationship between Bread for the World, partner organization, and the scholarship holder. It's with regard to Africa, it's funding scholarship programs in different African countries: the Democratic Republic of Congo, Cameroon, Uganda, Chad, Burkina Faso, Kenya, and Zimbabwe. They are all together about 600 students currently being supported in these scholarship programs. And there's also scholarship holders living in Germany, studying in Germany, or doing a PhD research in Germany. And currently we support 45 African scholarship holders in Germany. Another project that the scholarship desk, that's basically my department, is doing is also contribute funding education projects in the Democratic Republic of Congo and in Cameroon. So because our focus is on higher education, it is basically networking programs and education programs, excellency programs that are combined with the education at the university, but it's kind of as an extracurricular educational program in cooperation with the university. Now coming to education migration, my field of expertise, there's the so-called Stube program. I know that there's at least one person at the Institute of Cultural Diplomacy who knows about this program very well because she was participating in it. It's a political education program, a development education program addressing and engaging students from the Global South, like more than 3,000 students per year, 1,200 students of them being African students. So this takes place in Germany. The Ecumenical Emergency Fund is can be seen as a sort of like a little bit as a social assistance program. So students who are in a financial crisis, who just need a little bit of money to keep going, they can apply to this Ecumenical Emergency Fund at like 100 different places in Germany, local counseling places. With that program, we support roughly 1,300 African students per year. So this you can imagine this as a mini scholarship program, which compensates for the lack of financial support that German students can receive from the state, but international students cannot receive from the state. So the NGO comes in here and tries to bridge that gap to some extent. There is also a network being found and now being built up to support the political self-organization and also political representation of international students. And there are about 30 students active in that program, half of them being African students. So this is what Bread for the World is contributing to in terms of educational cooperation. Just to have a little picture on of the world map. Actually, in terms of surplus scholarships, so within those regions, the majority is in Asia. But of course, we have, as I already mentioned, 600 students in African countries. And other players can you actually understand the last? Can you actually understand what I'm saying? Because I just realized that. Oh, okay, maybe no. Yeah. Anyways, all right. Okay. So there are also other scholarship programs. I will get to I think some interesting questions. Now, as if you look at what is the interest of the German state in fostering educational cooperation in academia. So the so-called Internationalisierungsstrategy, like the strategy of internationalization, we see that the most central goal is to support German universities in achieving a high position in international university rankings, to attract the greatest talents and best qualified people for German industries and the German societies. So something that we call brain gain. That they want to enhance the intercultural competences of German students and future leaders, and of course they want to build business relationships. And this is quite explicit in the strategy that they drafted, and I think there are a couple of things missing. So I mean, that could be an interesting question for later. What is the perspective of African states on the question of international educational migration in academia? What is the perspective of civil society? And that is personally my most central concern, what is the global perspective behind it? Because I think that a global perspective is very much needed to advance the global body of knowledge, to advance science. That is an issue that doesn't appear once in these 15 pages of strategy. which I would expect, okay, if it's a university-oriented strategy, that would be one of the first things to come up with is, okay, to contribute to science, scientific progress. I think it's important to do that, because that's one of the great things about knowledge is you cannot really stop it with border controls. You know, I mean, you have to completely cut off all communication channels in order to do that, and that implies very high costs. Knowledge is a non-rival good. That means if you share it, you don't have less, you have more of it. Okay, that's something that I think is still not fully used, and especially when we talk about African societies, African perspective, there's a vast amount of knowledge resources that academia didn't really tap into yet, and that is partly due to Western domination of academia, and I think that also needs to change in order to advance the knowledge body. Also, it is necessary to achieve those 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Complexity, uncertainty, scarcity of resources, and scarcity of time basically means that we need to mobilize all educational resources we have. And I think we should do so in solidarity. That means from competing between different countries and different universities to a cooperation, from a national perspective to a global perspective, and from a sense of superiority, which is also very often institutionalized in academic settings, to a sense of solidarity. Also, just one final word on cooperation. I think with cooperation you have to look at who does not participate in the cooperation, and how are these actors being affected by the cooperation, and to which extent can they be included in the cooperation. So because if two actors agree upon how they can more effectively exploit the third actor, that is not the type of cooperation that we as Bread for the World would support. So these are just a couple of impulses on the issue of educational cooperation. Sorry if I took too much time. Thank you very much. Yeah.